They were supposed to be gone for just a weekend. Jason and Melissa Cooper were the kind of couple everyone admired. High school sweethearts, married young, and still in love after a decade. They built a quiet life in Maple Ridge, a sleepy town tucked between forests and rivers. Jason ran a home renovation business, and Melissa worked as a part-time art teacher at the local elementary school. They weren't rich. They weren't flashy. But they were happy. Deeply, genuinely happy. Together, they had 2 children. Lily, a precocious 10-year-old who loved sketching animals, and Max, a 7-year-old boy obsessed with dinosaurs and fire trucks. They were the kind of family that always waved at neighbors, that left handwritten thank you cards after dinner parties. The kind of family that people said, you don't meet anymore. In early December of 2016, the Coopers packed up their SUV and headed north for a short winter retreat. Jason had found a cozy cabin rental near Black Hollow Ridge, a remote stretch of forestland known for its stunning mountain views, winding roads, and dangerously unpredictable weather. It was a last-minute getaway before the holiday season kicked into full swing. A chance to unplug. Just them, the snow, and the trees. They never came back. The first sign that something was wrong came 36 hours after they left town. Melissa's mother, who spoke with her daughter daily, couldn't reach her. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Spotty signal, winding roads, it wasn't unusual. But by the second day, after multiple calls went straight to voicemail and none of their texts were read, a cold dread began to set in. Police traced the family's route and discovered they'd last been seen at a gas station just outside Black Hollow. Security footage showed them filling up the tank, the kids in the back seat laughing about the snow. Melissa waved at the cashier before they drove off. That was the last time anyone saw the Cooper family alive. A massive search was launched. Helicopters scanned the ridges. Drones were flown over creeks and cliffs. Dozens of volunteers combed through the surrounding woods. Bloodhounds traced the family's scent for almost 2 miles before the trail abruptly vanished. No skid marks. No broken branches. No car. No signs of distress. It was as if the Coopers had simply dissolved into the storm. And what a storm it was. Locals still talk about the blizzard that hit Black Hollow that night. Whiteout conditions. Sub-zero temperatures. Winds so strong that even the birds didn't fly. Roads disappeared under 6 feet of snow in just hours. Power lines snapped. GPS systems glitched. It was the kind of storm that only happens once in a decade, and the Coopers were caught in the middle of it. Authorities initially assumed the worst. The SUV must have slid off the road into a ravine or gotten buried under snow somewhere remote. But even when the snow melted months later, no wreckage was ever found. Not even a tire track. Search efforts were scaled back, then quietly called off. The case went cold, but not for everyone. Detective Alan Reyes, one of the lead investigators on the case, said something never sat right with him. People vanish in storms all the time, he once said in an interview. But not like this. Not without a trace. Not a whole family. And then, there was the voicemail. It never made it into public record. Out of respect for the family, or maybe out of fear of causing panic, it was buried in the file and left alone. But 7 years later, as the story resurfaces, that voicemail has been re-examined. And it raises more questions than it answers. It was sent at 11:47 p.m. on the night they vanished. Melissa called her sister, but the line didn't go through. Instead, it went to voicemail. For years, the message sat unheard, until her sister recently accessed her old backup cloud storage. And this is what it said. We've been driving in circles. I don't know where we are. Jason's trying to stay calm, but the road it keeps going. We saw someone by the trees earlier, but when we stopped, there was no one there. The kids are scared. Wait. More static. A thud. Then whispered, almost breathless. They're not letting us leave, he's here. Then silence. The call ended abruptly. No coordinates. No signal ping. No follow-up. Investigators assumed it was the storm. Poor signal. Hysteria. The mind plays tricks when you're cold, lost, and scared. But Melissa's sister swore she knew her sister's voice. That wasn't panic. That was fear. Real, paralyzing fear. So what did she mean by they're not letting us leave? Who was he? Was someone following them? Watching them? Or was it something worse? In the weeks that followed, more strange reports surfaced. A local logger claimed to have seen flickering lights in the woods the night of the storm. A hiker swore he heard screaming in the trees, But when he went to check, found only deep, unbroken snow. And perhaps most unsettling of all, a reclusive park ranger who patrolled the Black Hollow Ridge area for over a decade, disappeared without explanation just days after the Coopers vanished. No note, no transfer request, just gone. Was it a coincidence? Or the beginning of something far darker? The official report labeled the case an accident, presumed dead, lost to weather conditions. But anyone who's followed the story knows there's something else buried beneath the snow. And now, 7 years later, something is starting to thaw. As months turned into years, the Cooper family's disappearance faded from headlines, but not from memory. In Maple Ridge, their photos remained pinned to bulletin boards. Flowers still appeared outside the elementary school where Melissa once taught. But beyond the quiet grief, whispers persisted. Whispers that something wasn't right. That what happened on Black Hollow Ridge wasn't just a tragic accident. Local folklore had always painted Black Hollow as a strange, haunted place. A stretch of forest older than memory, thick with fog and secrets. Stories passed down through generations, of ghost sightings, of campers vanishing without a trace, of radio signals jamming when you got too deep. Most brushed it off as superstition. But that winter night in 2016 gave the stories new life. In the weeks following the storm, multiple residents of the nearby mountain town of Elkhead reported seeing strange lights in the woods, soft, pulsing orbs that floated silently between the trees, vanishing when approached. One hunter claimed he saw a glowing figure standing at the edge of a frozen ravine, just staring up at the sky. He never returned to that area again. Then came the more troubling claims. A teenage couple who'd gone up to Black Hollow for a late-night drive said they heard what sounded like children crying in the forest. It was weird, the girl later recalled. Like it was right next to the car, but we couldn't see anyone. Just trees. Endless trees. They left in a panic and crashed their vehicle a few miles down the road. Both survived, but swore never to speak of it again. The internet, of course, had its own theories. Some believed the Coopers were abducted, either by a deranged survivalist living off the grid or something not human. Others speculated that Jason and Melissa staged their disappearance. That maybe there were financial problems, a breakdown in the marriage, and they'd used the storm as cover to vanish and start over. But anyone who truly knew the Coopers dismissed that outright. They were solid, loving, whole. Still, one piece of the story remained strangely underreported. The ranger. At the time of the disappearance, the area around Black Hollow was patrolled by just one man, Ranger Thomas Delaney. He was a quiet, solitary figure in his mid-60s, known to live alone in a small outpost deep in the forest, only coming into town for supplies once a month. He'd worked the ridge for nearly 20 years and knew its twists and turns better than anyone. 2 days after the Coopers were last seen, Delaney made a single call to the ranger station. Weather's cleared up. Going to check the northeast sector. Snow's deep. Bring chainsaws. It was the last anyone ever heard from him. When officers arrived at his outpost a week later, they found it empty. Fireplace cold. Door unlocked. His ranger truck was still parked outside, keys in the ignition. Inside the cabin, his logbook was open to December 17th, and the final entry simply read, "They're not alone out here." That was it. Ranger Delaney became a footnote in the Cooper case, a minor oddity in an already strange file. Officially listed as missing, presumed dead. Perhaps caught in the same storm. Perhaps another casualty of the forest. But that all changed 7 years later. It started with a hiker named Eli Delaney. At first, no one made the connection. He'd introduced himself only as Eli. Early 30s, scruffy, soft-spoken. He arrived in Elkhead in late January, just after another brutal snowstorm had blanketed the ridge. Locals said he kept to himself, staying in a small roadside motel and spending long hours in the woods alone. Said he was writing a travel piece. Said he was chasing the legend of the Coopers. But that wasn't entirely true. Eli was Ranger Delaney's son. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Growing up, Eli had only known his father as distant and difficult, a man who loved the silence of trees more than his own family. After his parents split, Eli stayed with his mother in Portland, while his father disappeared deeper and deeper into the woods. Over the years, letters stopped. Calls went unanswered. By the time Eli turned 25, he assumed his father was already dead to the world. But something changed when the Cooper case made headlines. Eli saw his father's name mentioned in a local article about the search efforts. A quote, a photo, and suddenly, the man he'd spent years trying to forget was tied to a mystery no one could solve. Still, Eli didn't reach out. Until years later, when his mother passed away and, in cleaning out her attic, he found an unopened letter, dated December 10, 2016. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's. Inside was a single sentence. If anything happens to me, don't let them bury the truth. There was no return address, no explanation, just that ominous line, and a feeling Eli couldn't shake. He had to go back. He had to find out what happened, not just to the Coopers, but to his father. And that's how Eli ended up on Black Hollow Ridge 7 years later, hiking alone through the trees his father once patrolled, retracing steps never taken, looking not just for answers, but for closure. For weeks, he found nothing. But then, on a bitter morning in late February, he followed a barely visible deer trail that veered off the marked path. According to park maps, it shouldn't have existed. Yet there it was. Faint footprints, a narrow bend through the trees, and something gleaming up ahead, partially buried under layers of snow and glacial ice. At first, Eli thought it was a rock. But as the sun broke through the trees and hit the object just right, he saw metal. A curve. A tire rim. It was a car. Or at least what was left of one. Encased in ice. Sunken into a frozen ravine. The storm must have buried it, year after year, until it was swallowed whole by the land. Heart pounding, Eli scraped away more snow, revealing a faded license plate. He froze. It was the Cooper's SUV. And inside, through the cloudy glass, half obscured by frost and time, was something else. A handprint. On the inside of the window. Fingers stretched, as if trying to claw their way out. But the hand was small. Child-sized. Eli Delaney's breath caught in his throat as he stared through the frost-laced window. Behind the glass, a small, frozen hand was pressed against the inside of the SUV. The fingers were pale blue, the nails still faintly pink under the ice, preserved in time. But what drew his attention next was the sleeve, bright red, though dulled by layers of frost and snow. It was unmistakable. Melissa Cooper's coat. The very one she was last seen wearing in the blurry gas station security footage taken hours before the storm hit. Waving goodbye to the clerk, smiling as she carried Max in her arms. Shaking, Eli stepped back. His father's cryptic warning rang in his ears again. Don't let them bury the truth. Within hours, he called it in. Search and rescue teams arrived the next morning, accompanied by local police, Forest Service agents, and forensic investigators. News broke within the day. Missing family's vehicle discovered in Glacier, splashed across every screen from Portland to New York. But the celebration that they'd finally found answers was short-lived. The excavation was slow. The SUV was buried in layers of compacted snow, frozen dirt, and rock, sealed within what geologists identified as a glacial pocket, formed by years of drifting permafrost and melt cycles. It had likely slid into the crevice during the storm, completely hidden from aerial views and satellite scans. What chilled the rescue teams wasn't just the condition of the vehicle, it was how well-preserved it was. It looked almost untouched. No shattered windows. No signs of impact. As if it had simply been placed there. Hour by hour, they carved the vehicle free, working carefully to preserve any physical evidence. By day 3, they were able to pry open the rear doors. What they found inside was a heartbreak frozen in time. In the back seat were the remains of Lily and Max, curled against each other, their small bodies huddled beneath a blanket. Melissa had clearly tried to keep them warm. Her arm was around them. She, too, had succumbed to the cold. But even in death, there was no sign of panic, only the tragic peace of a mother doing everything she could in her final moments. The authorities moved slowly, delicately. Trauma teams and counselors were brought in. But as they documented the scene, a growing list of anomalies began to pile up, things that didn't add up. First, the driver's seat was empty. Not just empty, but immaculate. No blood, no damage, no evidence of injury or struggle. It was as though no one had ever sat there. Second, the keys were gone. Despite combing every inch of the vehicle and surrounding area, no ignition key was ever found. Melissa's purse remained intact, her phone still lodged under the seat. But no keys, nowhere inside or outside the SUV. not even dropped in the snow. Third, all of the doors were locked from the outside. And that's when things got even stranger. As investigators began to photograph the dashboard, one officer paused. Something was etched into the frost-covered plastic just above the glove box. It had been scratched in with something sharp, frantic, uneven lines, almost like it had been done in a rush. At first, no one could make sense of it. Then the letters became clear. Carved into the dashboard in shaky, desperate strokes were 6 chilling words. "Stay away. He's still out here." Everything stopped. The words were immediately photographed, analyzed, and sent to forensic specialists. The scratch patterns suggested it was done with something narrow, possibly a car key or pen tip. The depth indicated pressure, maybe fear. Whoever had written it had done so quickly, but deliberately. But who had written it? Melissa was found in the back seat, holding the children. Jason Cooper was nowhere to be found. Could it have been him? Or had Melissa somehow managed to write it before joining the kids? And most disturbingly, who was he? Theories began circulating again. Maybe Jason had survived and gone mad in the wilderness, turned feral, unable, or unwilling to come forward. Maybe Melissa hadn't trusted the person who came to help them. But some remembered that final voicemail Melissa left the night of their disappearance. "They're not letting us leave, he's here." Until now, most had assumed she was talking about being trapped in the storm. But now, those words took on a darker meaning. He's here. Not it's snowing. Not the roads are closed. But he, a person, someone watching, someone keeping them from leaving. Some began to believe the Cooper family wasn't just lost in the storm. They were hunted, kept, hidden in the ice, until nature itself began to uncover the truth. But the final question remained, echoing louder than ever. Where was Jason Cooper? And even more chilling, was he still alive? The message on the dashboard changed everything. What was once treated as a tragic accident lost to nature became something far darker. Law enforcement officially reopened the Cooper case, not as a search and rescue closure, but as an active criminal investigation. The local coroner's office began their examination of the remains of Melissa and the children. While they were found largely intact due to the ice, autopsy reports stunned investigators and the public alike. There were bruises, odd, almost symmetrical markings around the wrists and ankles of both Melissa and the children. Not injuries caused by a car crash or exposure to cold. These were restraint marks, ligature wounds. Someone had tied them down. And the most harrowing detail of all, the time of death. Melissa, Lily, and Max did not die the night of the storm. They died days later. The medical examiners estimated they had survived at least 4 to 5 days after the storm. That meant they weren't victims of the blizzard. They were victims of something else. Something, or someone, that kept them hidden, restrained, and silent in the heart of Black Hollow Ridge. Eli Delaney was numb. He had come here to walk the same trails his estranged father, the missing park ranger Raymond Delaney, once did. He thought maybe he could reconcile with the man's ghost by honoring his memory. But now, he found himself wading into the swampy edges of a decades-old mystery, and a growing suspicion that his father may have known far more than he ever said. He couldn't shake the memory of the voicemail, the desperate tone in Melissa Cooper's voice, and that scratched warning on the dashboard. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Driven by instinct more than logic, Eli packed a flashlight and a crowbar and made the long trek to his father's old ranger cabin, a derelict outpost in the northwest quadrant of the park that had been abandoned since the early 2000s. It had been boarded up after Raymond vanished without a trace, a quiet closure to a man who had simply walked out of the station one morning and never returned. Inside, the place was thick with dust and silence. The roof sagged in one corner. Moss crawled up the wooden beams. But beneath the decay, something remained preserved. In a hidden drawer beneath the desk, secured by a rusted latch, Eli found a leather-bound journal. Several, actually. His father's handwriting, cramped and methodical, filled the pages in faded ink. The entries began mundane, reports of trail maintenance, patrol routes, wildlife sightings, but gradually, the tone shifted. Over the months, Raymond began writing about something strange, something he called the Watcher in the Pines. He described feeling observed while on patrol, shadows moving where they shouldn't, whispers in the dark timberline, and unnatural silence when he passed certain parts of the woods. Birds would stop singing. Squirrels would freeze and flee. Dogs would refuse to walk near it. The Watcher, he wrote, wasn't just a figure in his mind. Locals, too, had whispered about a presence in Black Hollow Ridge for generations. Stories passed down about a man, if you could call him that, who lived in the forest, unseen, but always near. A collector, a keeper. Raymond's writing grew increasingly erratic as the entries went on. One page simply read, "He doesn't like visitors. He doesn't kill for sport. He waits until they're broken." Eli shivered reading the final entries. But what made his blood run cold wasn't in the writing. It was in the photos. Inside a plastic sleeve wedged between pages was a stack of Polaroids. Some were old shots of wildlife, bears, elk, mountain views, but tucked near the back was one photo that made Eli stop breathing. It was dated March 2016, 2 months after the Cooper family had disappeared. In it stood Raymond Delaney, his father, in full Ranger uniform, smiling. Beside him stood Jason Cooper, the man who was supposedly missing, presumed dead in the storm. The timestamp didn't lie. Jason Cooper was alive after his wife and children died. After the storm. After the world had stopped looking. And now, all of the questions came roaring back. Where had Jason gone? Why had he been with Raymond Delaney? And what had they been doing out here, together, after the family vanished? Eli stared at the photo, a sick feeling pooling in his stomach. His father, the man he'd come to mourn, had known Jason, had met him after the tragedy, had documented the Watcher in his journals. Was the Watcher even real? Or was it a cover? Had his father helped Jason? Had he known what happened to Melissa and the kids, and done nothing? And worst of all, was Jason Cooper still out there? As Eli stood in the center of that dark cabin, surrounded by his father's ramblings and the scent of old pine, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just a family that went missing. This was a cover-up. And whatever had happened in Black Hollow Ridge was far from over. It didn't take long after the discovery in the cabin for the forest to give up its next secret. A call came in the following morning. A seasonal forestry team clearing debris from an old access road reported a collapse, what they thought was a sinkhole near the edge of a dry creek bed. But beneath the crumbled earth, half swallowed by roots and time, they discovered the sealed top of a stone well. Its circular mouth had been covered with wooden planks and nailed shut. Authorities arrived quickly, fearing it might be an old bootlegging dump or worse. But what they found inside the well brought the entire investigation to a standstill. The body was curled in the fetal position, partially mummified by cold and time. Tattered Ranger uniform. Weather-worn name tag still legible, Raymond Delaney. Eli was there when they pulled the body out. His throat tightened. He had come to find answers about his father's disappearance, but he never imagined it would end with a corpse buried in a hidden well. Still, one thing was clear. The positioning, the way the planks were nailed from the outside, Raymond hadn't fallen in. He had been put there, deliberately, to be hidden. But that wasn't all. Clutched in his bony fingers was a single journal page, sealed in a plastic bag, as though he knew it might one day be found. The ink was smudged but readable. Scrawled across it, in jagged, panicked handwriting. He took the form of a man, but he's not one of us. The phrase echoed in Eli's mind like a drumbeat. The Watcher in the pines. His father had believed it. Believed something was out there, something wearing human skin but not bound by human laws. But who had his father met? And then the second discovery came. A flash drive found in a rusted ammunition box hidden behind a false panel in the ranger station. Inside were 2 video logs, a few photos, and several typed notes. The metadata confirmed the impossible. The files were created by Jason Cooper. Jason had survived the storm, but he hadn't returned to society. He hadn't tried to reach family or authorities. Instead, he went off-grid with Raymond Delaney, deep into the wilderness, leaving his past and the world behind. The video was rough, handheld, grainy in the dim light of the cabin. Jason looked thinner, gaunter than the smiling man in the old family photos. His beard was overgrown. His eyes were haunted. He spoke slowly, voice tight with fear. We tried to run. We thought we'd beat the storm. But it wasn't the storm that took us off the road. It was him. Or it. I don't know what to call it anymore. We crashed. I got us out, got them to shelter in an old bunker near the ridge. I thought we could wait it out. But he found us. He wasn't human. He looked like a man. Wore a parka, had a soft voice. Said he was a search and rescue officer. But he knew things. Personal things. Things no one should have known. Melissa knew it too late. By then, he'd already cut the brake lines. Trapped us. Jason paused in the video, looked away, wiped his face. I tried to keep them safe. I fed them, kept the fire going. But I couldn't keep them calm. The kids were terrified. And then he started coming at night. Not knocking, just watching. I went out one morning, and there was a deer, gutted and hanging upside down. But no footprints. No blood trail. Just the eyes in the trees. Always the eyes. In a second clip, Jason spoke faster. He was panicked now, shifting between hope and despair. Raymond found me. I ran into him on the trail weeks later. He brought me here. Hid me. We made a pact. If anything happened, we'd bury the truth. But I kept thinking, what if isolation was the wrong choice? What if it wanted us isolated? We thought we could contain it, or avoid it, or hide in the woods and be forgotten. But it's still here, still watching, waiting. I thought isolation would keep it away. I was wrong. The final note was handwritten, found tucked into Jason's old coat, preserved in a plastic sleeve beneath the floorboards. It simply read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed. I'm sorry. I never meant for them to die. I just wanted to protect them from him, from it. If I could trade places with them, I would. Tell them I tried." Eli sat on the cabin steps for a long time, the note shaking in his hands. His father had died trying to help a man escape something that couldn't be outrun. Jason had lost his family not just to a tragedy of nature, but to a predator that wore a man's face. And still, the question remained, what was it? Something supernatural? Or something entirely human? More terrifying because of its familiarity? The evidence pointed both ways. The Watcher in the Pines might have been a legend, or a cover, or a distorted mask for a real monster, a man who hunted in the woods, using storms as his camouflage. The cliffhanger came as authorities announced their final find that evening. Beneath the collapsed well, hidden beneath layers of stone, they found a second compartment. Buried with Raymond's body was an old ranger's duffel bag. Inside, an animal mask, a parka, rusted restraints, and a faded photo of Melissa Cooper circled in red ink. After the journal pages, the notes, and the revelation of Jason's harrowing confession, authorities believed they had unearthed the darkest secrets of Black Hollow Ridge. But then, Eli received a call. A university wildlife research team, working in a neighboring sector of the forest, had stumbled upon a trail camera. It had fallen from its post during the last storm and had been found half-buried beneath pine needles and brush. The timestamp? Just 1 week before the discovery of Melissa's coat frozen in the glacier. Eli drove out to the ranger station where the footage was being reviewed. The lead technician looked pale, a tight grip on his thermos of coffee. He didn't say a word. He just turned the monitor. The footage was grainy, infrared night vision. The camera faced a narrow animal trail just a few hundred yards from the site where the family SUV had been found frozen into the glacier. For the first several minutes, there was only wind, the faint rustling of trees, occasional snowfall drifting across the lens. And then, movement. A figure. Tall. Motionless. It appeared from the edge of the frame. Not walking. Not emerging. Just suddenly there. It stood completely still, not swaying, not reacting to the wind or the cold. Eli leaned in closer. "Is that a person?" he whispered. The technician shook his head. "Keep watching." The figure didn't move for hours. The timestamp advanced. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2:15 a.m. The forest remained unchanged, save for the unnatural stillness of that figure. Then, at 3:03 a.m., the screen briefly glitched. Just one frame. In that single stutter, the figure had disappeared. Not walked away. Not stepped back. Gone. Vanished. Eli felt his skin crawl. He rewound the footage. Played it again. Frame by frame. From full presence to absence in a blink. And then, just when the screen seemed to return to stillness, another shape emerged. This time it came closer. Slowly. From deep in the woods, barely visible at first. A face. Blurry. Pale. Right up against the camera lens. Its features were stretched, almost too symmetrical, and yet something about the eyes felt wrong. Wide. Watching. Wrong. The mouth didn't move. But behind the silence, the camera's audio picked up a faint frequency. A low, almost imperceptible hum that grew louder the longer the figure remained on screen. And then, static. The camera cut off. There was no animal trigger, no fall, or impact. The power source was intact when recovered, but the footage simply ended, as though something had deliberately silenced it. Forensics analysts tried to clean up the image, enhance it, break it into digital fragments. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. The figure's proportions didn't match a human. Shoulders too wide, neck too long, facial bones subtly misaligned. It resembled a person, yes, but not completely. It was as if something was trying to mimic a human and failing in tiny, unsettling ways. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered it was a forest spirit, an old Appalachian legend. Others insisted it was a cryptid, some undiscovered predator that mimics prey or assumes the identities of lost hikers. But then there were those who held a darker belief. They said it wasn't native to the forest at all, that Jason had brought it with him, that whatever it was, this watcher in the pines, this faceless imitation, had followed the Coopers into the woods that night and hadn't let them go. Some say Jason tried to escape something that had attached itself to him long before the storm. A curse, a presence, a thing that only wore the skin of men. Perhaps it had followed Jason for years. Perhaps it fed on isolation, despair, regret. And once the Coopers were alone on that icy road, it revealed itself, trapping them in the one place no one would think to look. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't done. After all, what kind of creature leaves a message scratched into a frozen dashboard? What kind of thing stands still for hours under snowfall, not to hunt, but to be seen? And what did Jason mean when he wrote, "I thought isolation would keep it away"? I was wrong. As the footage was archived and locked away under state review, Eli sat in the back of the ranger station, staring out at the pines. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The wind rustled the trees gently, brushing over the ice-packed earth. In the distance, a branch snapped, not by weight or weather, but as if something heavy had stepped through. Eli didn't move. He only remembered one final line, Jason's voice echoing from the recovered footage. "If you hear it whisper your name, it's already too late."